Hello Internet, my name is Ren. This is Rants, a channel where I rant about many things that I care about with a particular focus on pop culture and politics. In this video, we're finally getting caught up with the Orville with Season 2, Episode 5, All the World is Birthday Cake. Similar to my other new videos, I'll be doing this with a brief, spoiler-free overview of my opinions about this episode, and then I'll talk about the plot a little more in depth for those of you who have already seen this episode. Spoiler warnings will be on screen, so heed those warnings or ignore them at your own risk, but you can't say I didn't tell you what was going to happen here. Before I get into that, I do just want to thank you all for being so patient with me. I have been pretty sick lately, and it's been a struggle for me to get out of bed, much less make videos. So I really appreciate everyone for letting me know that you're excited for new videos, but for not hounding me when I'm gone. I just really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. But I do still feel obligated to somehow keep up with content, so let's jump into this. Overall, I did really like this episode, but I wouldn't rank it super high in terms of my favorite episodes this season. It's definitely above the first two in terms of overall quality and enjoyability, I think, but I also think it's definitely below Nothing Left on Earth Excepting Fishes and Home in terms of having a story that has a real impact. But I understand that not every episode of The Orville is meant to be a deep dive character story, so I get why they went more of a light direction there and focused a little bit more on the sci-fi story this time. And it wasn't the most original story that we've ever seen. It definitely has an early TNG vibe, but I think that's fine because The Orville really is sold as a love letter to kind of like 90s and early 2000s era Trek, and I think that that comes across really clearly, but I also think it's distinct enough that it should be judged on its own merits as its own show, but it's not trying to sell you hard sci-fi. It's not trying to sell you like a visually stunning show because they just don't have the budget for that. It's trying to sell you a fun romp through space with a goofy little crew on a mid-sized Union ship. It's giving you exactly what it's promising you, and if that's what you go into this show expecting, you're gonna like it. And I did like this episode. I did find it kind of charming, and it was sort of one of those fun little episodes that makes you think a bit, but there was nothing super profound about it either. It was also an opportunity to introduce us to the new security officer. Her name is Tala. She's another Selayan. I don't feel like that's too much of a spoiler, that's why I'm including it here. And I think she's a really nice addition to the crew. I like that she's different enough from Alara that it doesn't feel like they're just trying to replace her with the exact same character, because that is kind of something I was concerned about when I realized they were replacing her with a character that, for the most part, looks very similar to Alara. But she's very much distinct and different in terms of her personality, so I don't think it's too much of an issue that they're that similar. And it is explained why it is another Selayan, although that does bring me back to the observation I made in my review of Home, where I'm kind of questioning, if Selayans are regularly in the Union, why didn't they know about the illness that would happen to Alara when she left her own planet, and why didn't they have a treatment course planned for it beforehand? It just seems like a really shady oversight. Okay, so that is everything I can really say about this episode without going into more detail. So from here on out, there will be spoilers. We're just going to do a quick recap of the episode, and I'm going to give a bit more detailed feedback about what I thought of it overall. So here we go. The episode starts out with a group of aliens debating whether or not to send a message out into space, and they decide to send a signal saying, "Is anyone out there?" We then cut to the Orville meeting with another ship to pick up Tala, the new security officer. It turns out she punched her previous captain in the face, but she did have a pretty good reason. They had been damaged by the krill and needed to seek aid from the nearest vessel, which turned out to be a matriarchal Genesi ship. And a man in a dominant position like her captain would simply not do in terms of getting assistance from them, so she knocked him out cold, but they did repair their power grid. Kelly likes her. Ed isn't quite so sure, but Kelly reveals that he did specifically ask for another Chilean, so at least explains why we get such a similar character to replace Alara. But again, her actual personality and everything else is pretty different. It's just very similar in terms of looks at first. And she's a little bit older, has a little more experience under her belt, she's a lot more confident, so it is a very different dynamic that we get to see between her and the bridge crew, where it's not quite such a youthful character who's still suffering from those sort of self-esteem issues. She's much more established in her career and who she is, and so I think it'll be interesting to see how the dynamics on the ship change going forward, and I always like to see a little bit of change, although I will definitely miss Alara. Back on the bridge, Kelly asks Bortus for a joint birthday party, and Bortus declines because he prefers his birthday to be his day, even though their birthdays are very close together. Gordon agrees because he admits that he thinks joint birthday parties are a ploy that always results in getting less stuff. And I guess he's not all that wrong, but I personally don't see the problem with a joint birthday party. The Orville ends up picking up the alien signal, and they decide to prep all stations for first contact.
All hands, this is the captain. Begin prepping all stations for first contact.
This is one of my favorite parts of the episode, because the crew is stoked. They are so excited. It seems like first contact is just like a party for them. They're so excited to meet a new species and to welcome a new species to the galaxy, and it's adorable. And little moments like that are why I love the Orville so much.
Oh baby, this is it! This is what we signed up for!
Just this excited about getting to meet a new species. Absolutely precious. And it was one of those little moments that again kind of characterizes the show with that sort of optimism that makes it stand out from other sci-fi shows right now, which tend to be a little bit more dark and gritty than what we might be used to. I'm not even saying those are bad, I'm just saying the Orville is standing out because it's filling this desire for more optimistic content. Claire, Ed, Kelly, Bortus, and Tala take a shuttle to the planet, and they're greeted by fairly friendly aliens. They're eager to show them around and excited to share their culture with them, and Ed explains that it's general Union policy to answer when a civilization tries to make contact either with vessels or with transmissions like these aliens did, and I, again, really like how it continues with just very subtle world building so that we learn a little bit more about the Union and their values and what they kind of stand for and what they do. And it's sort of just organically woven into the plot. There's no big exposition about the Union outside of little tidbits that we usually get from the characters themselves. And I think that's a good way to make the world feel a little bit more grounded and a little bit more lived in. Claire is excited to tour a primitive hospital, and while she and Tala are looking at the facility, they notice that there are a lot of premature births and emergency C-sections, but when Claire scans one of the prospective mothers who's actually undergoing the procedure, she realizes that there doesn't seem to be any medical reason to be doing it. So she asks the aliens why they decide to do the C-section, and they explain that it's to avoid the children being born Gilliac, because apparently children who are born Gilliac are prone to violent tendencies and destructive behavior. Later, at a state dinner, after Ed plagiarizes a speech and Tala's strength is sort of performed as a party trick when she bends the absolute crap out of a candlestick, everything seems to be going very well until Kelly mentions that the first contact feels like an exciting birthday present because her birthday is in a few days, and so is Bortus's. Immediately, everyone flips the absolute fork out. YouTube age restrictions, and Bortus and Kelly are immediately apprehended and whisked away. Ed, Claire, and Tala are all immediately imprisoned and have parts of their teeth extracted in order to determine their date of birth. Once it's confirmed that they're not Gilliac, they are asked to leave, and Claire puts two and two together and realizes that this is a planet that is governed by astrology, and that Gilliac is a birth sign, which Kelly and Bortus happen to fall into, and this entire planet is prejudiced against this birth sign. Bortus and Kelly are sent to an internment camp, and when Bortus asks her what's going on, she says it's a bad birthday. Eventually they come to the same conclusion that Claire came to, and realize that it must have something to do with their birth sign and probably has something to do with astrological significance on this particular planet. They get into a scuffle with the guards, and things aren't going so hot for them. Meanwhile, aboard the Orville, Ed contacts Admiral Perry to try and get an extraction. He's also played by the same actor who plays Michael on The Good Place, and so every scene that he was in, I was expecting more hijinks to ensue, but unfortunately they didn't. The Admiral explains that because it's a first contact scenario, there's no way that they're going to do any kind of armed extraction, so Ed is going to have to talk his way out of this. Back in the internment camp, Bortus and Kelly witness a large, beefy prisoner picking on another pregnant prisoner and trying to take her food rations away. They intervene and protect her and sort of befriend her and her husband, and they ask why no one tries to escape, and it's clear that the brainwashing is so intense on this planet that the Gilliac don't even try to escape because they believe all the propaganda about them and they believe that they belong there and that they actually do have violent impulses and all of that. A month passes, and Ed continues to try and convince Admiral Perry to either intervene or let the Orville remain longer, but he's pretty adamant that the Orville needs to return to duty, and so they want the Orville to leave within 24 hours. He's already tried to reason with the Gregorians, and it's not going well, so he's sort of at an impasse, but he really doesn't want to abandon his crew, obviously. The pregnant prisoner gives birth, but it's no longer under the Gilliac sign, now it's under the Wasanda sign, which means the baby is destined to be a leader on this planet. The mother wants to conceal the baby and keep it secret and keep it with them in the camp, and the father is reluctant because he thinks she could have more opportunities on the outside. Meanwhile, back aboard the Orville, while everyone's trying to figure out what to do, Tala realizes that a Gilliac star vanished around 3,000 years ago in their constellation, and it was viewed as a bad omen, so that's probably why the Gilliac are discriminated against. Back on the planet, there is an inspection in the camp, and the baby almost is undiscovered, hidden underneath one of the floorboards. But the husband reveals the location of the baby and alerts the guard that it's a Wasanda child, so that the child will be taken away to a better life. The mom is understandably upset, and more drama ensues. Aboard the ship, John comes up with the idea for a solar sail which they could anchor indefinitely that would reflect light back to the planet and look like a star. It would also fool their rudimentary technology. And it seems like a good way to find a sneaky loophole out of this situation. Bortus and Kelly attempt to escape, and they fail miserably. They're almost executed by a firing squad, but just in time, John and Gordon come in clutch with that solar sail and deploy it, and a new star appears in the sky. The Gregorian leaders recognize the new star and decide to reconsider their position on the Gilliacs. Bortus and Kelly are freed and return to the Orville, and they get news that all of the Gilliac camps were eventually opened and the Gilliac were allowed to re-enter society, and Bortus and Kelly have their joint birthday party on the bridge of the Orville, and while Kelly notes that they should have had the party in the mess hall, Gordon and John just had to show them an excellent video that they made of the two of them. It is adorable. This whole episode has so many cute little moments, and I think that really is what makes this episode so enjoyable to me. It's definitely not my favorite episode this season, but it has a couple of really good moments. The last major moment in the episode, Tala and Ed discuss the situation where they've lied to an entire planet and created a phony star. Basically, they just hope that by the time the Gregorians have good enough technology to get up there and figure out what's going on, their society will have progressed to the point where they're no longer so superstitious that they're putting people into internment camps over when they're bored. So the sci-fi plot of this episode was pretty good. It wasn't anything super creative. It was kind of a very hesitant Holocaust, Japanese internment kind of allegory where people are being discriminated against for really arbitrary reasons. I did notice that they tried to make the uniforms kind of look like Holocaust clothing in terms of having a symbol on the chest and little things like that, but it wasn't too overt in the symbolism because I think it was sort of supposed to be, you know, any culture would be capable of discriminating based on such arbitrary characteristics. But I think it still teaches a necessary lesson that people still need to hear, even in 2019. So I think that the messaging of this episode was pretty good. There was nothing super original about that, but it was a sufficient episode, and I like that it introduced us to the new security chief. Tala seems like a cool character, and getting to know her was fun, and I look forward to seeing her more. And it's also nice to see that Ed and Kelly are still in a good place, even though Ed's relationship with Janelle obviously did not work out. So all in all, an enjoyable episode. Definitely not the most creative, definitely didn't go the farthest in terms of developing the characters and moving the story forward, so it does feel a little bit fillery, but I still enjoy this filler, so I don't care. Let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments section down below. Are you excited for the rest of this season? Do you think this season is better than season 1 so far? That's everything though. See you next time. Peter Zane.